Welcome to SEEK Bytes, an engineering podcast by engineers for engineers. That might have been one too many engineers.
I think it was the right number.
On this episode, we're talking about internal tools. Some of the things that we'll touch on today are understanding your customer, challenges of getting adoption for your tools, scaling support, spoiler, the answer is dogs, and sunsetting. Thanks for tuning in. Today I'll be hosting. My name's Seamus. I'm here with Bridget.
Hello.
Nik.
Hi.
And Reyna.
Hello.
Today we're going to be talking about internal tools, developer tooling, whatever name you want to call it, making all the good things for our friends, the other engineers.
Sometimes not friends.
Sometimes not friends. Yeah.
Depends how good a job you do.
Frenemies, sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's always a team that gives you an inordinate amount of support requests, and sometimes it's a good thing, sometimes it's not so good thing. I don't know. Is that too controversial?
I don't think so. Especially like sometimes you're like, oh God, this person again. And then you see the question and you're like,
you're not supposed to say
oh,
that.
it's a good one though. That's even worse.
Yeah. It exercises the support mechanisms and therefore they have to get better and stronger and, yeah.
Yeah, that's one of the challenges, right, is figuring out how best to support the other devs. You don't know how to support them if they're not asking for help.
Should we introduce our experience with devs as customers? Each of us have had experience with it. So I used to work in a team that dealt with actually making tools for other developers, deployment tools and the like, and also working on our CI/CD system. So, if that broke, I had a lot of people knocking at my door like, why isn't it working, please?
Mm-hmm. And we used to be in the same team.
Yeah.
That's my background as well. And before that, working in teams, kind of maintaining Kubernetes clusters. And it's a little bit of what the area that I still am working in. What about you, Reyna?
Yeah, I recently moved teams, but my old team used to look after the GraphQL platform for one of our domains. And so that's when that goes down, all traffic to SEEK does not go through. Sorry, all traffic to SEEK for the candidate side does not go through. But yes, it's a developer tool because other teams contribute to it. We don't own the schema or the APIs that it connects to, but we own the infrastructure around that.
Cool. Yeah, I worked in a sister team to Bridget and Nik,
Yay.
just called engineering, which is a conveniently generic name. But yeah, we sort of worked on our own internal tools as well as helping out with some other internal tools belonging to those teams as well. But I worked on an event-driven pipeline for the apply pipeline and the profile pipeline. So basically plumbing all the data from one side of the business, from the candidate side to the hirer side.
Yeah, I think we're kind of talking about services as well, right? But it's all general, same vein of doing things for other people.
Yeah, I think the big distinction is the other people being engineers as opposed to the other people being SEEK's end users or
product or
product or
someone.
BA or whoever.
Not even just being engineers, but being able to actually inspect the code itself. Because you can obviously consume like AWS's clients and services without being able to see the source code.
It's a really good point. Yeah.
So it's a whole different kind of customer when not only do they understand the technical concerns, but also can inspect the code and criticize it.
Well, and furthermore, they're in your Slack instance, right?
Yeah.
They're in your DMs.
It's not open source, and you've got a whole. You're only communicating through GitHub comments. You might bump into them in the office, and that kind of adds a different element to things.
Well, yeah, I mean, even if they're sitting on the same floor as you, right, and you just hear them start swearing about stuff. That was one of my favorite forms of feedback. Was witnessing someone having problems.
I don't know if I've heard somebody swearing, but I've definitely had people approach me at Friday drinks or something and say, "Hey, about this feature that I really need."
I do remember getting into a relatively heated philosophical debate on a PR a couple of years ago, and every time I see that person in the office, I'm always just kind of looking away subconsciously. Does this person remember what I look like? Does this person know who I am? Yeah, it is an interesting challenge, I think, having to deal with that interaction. It's not a stranger; it's someone that you actually will inevitably end up in meetings with.
Yeah, and with things being remote, it's even easier to kind of forget there is another human behind the the other side of that PR, and you got to be civil. And yeah, I think that's how we approached our support when we were doing a lot of support in Slack.
I hope so.
I think it is. I think you have to. I mean, you at the end of the day, you don't. Even and it's infrequent, but even when you get support requests that maybe could have used a little bit more detail, or maybe could have used a quick Slack search. At the end of the day, you have to encourage that. You can't you can't be super harsh on that and say, there's degrees and there's different ways of framing it, but at the end of the day, you want those things to come through, because to take a really systemsy view of things, that is a failure of your support system or your documentation system or your, the system as a whole, as it comprises everything that has to do with the software and all the other bits that go around it, which are often as important, if not more important. That's a system that's failing, and that's an input into how you can adjust to get better outcomes.
Yes. Although it's hard to get the kind of metrics that we're used to getting as developers, I think, for support systems, right? You can kind of look at an instance and be like, is it healthy or unhealthy? You can look at traffic and be like, oh no, there's something wrong. Whereas it feels like with support, it's very easy to be like, a lot of people had a bad day, or, oh, it's fine because there's nothing coming in. Did any of your teams have particular methods around checking, this is more support questions and should be coming in, how are we doing in terms of actually helping people? Do we need to reevaluate what kind of support we're giving? How did you keep your system health good and proper?
That was such a hard question for my team, because that was one of our OKRs was making it easy for developers to contribute to the graph. And it's how do we measure that? We have no way of understanding what that looks like. We played around with putting out a survey and people saying, asking different questions to figure out their satisfaction with our platform. That wasn't very helpful.
Did people answer the survey?
Less than 5.
Yeah. That's always been, I think, our experience as well, Bridget. You put out a survey, you're going to have to be aggressively okay with pestering people until they answer your survey. Otherwise, you just won't get the number of respondents you want. And
yeah,
I've kind of moved away from surveying.
Same. That lasted 1 quarter. And then I think it was getting people to answer the survey, but also figuring out what questions to ask to provide that kind of holistic view of what does it mean to be satisfied with our tool. There's so many different aspects to that. I think we kind of morphed how we measure and quote unquote measure is just based on other teams' kind of expertise with working with the graph. So how quickly they can get their stuff through, but not just in a hacky way, but in a really nice, sustainable, good design way. And just kind of our relationship with the other teams that typically put their stuff through our graph. That's kind of where we landed on. Probably heaps more to think about. That's where we're at the moment anyway.
I think it's challenging because this area feels so much less developed, and because we often don't have people whose dedicated role is to worry about these sorts of things. It feels like one thing I could imagine is just sheer number of contributions probably seems like a bad measure, because you were kind of saying, are they high quality contributions? Are they low quality contributions? But more and more I'm starting to feel like just measuring number of contributions to begin with and using that as a starting point and acknowledging that it's going to have some gaps, but we'll get some signal from it and we can iterate on that and kind of try and hone in on, okay, now we have some rough idea of if we do this, the number goes down, and if we do this, the number goes up, even if it's not a perfect measure. And then the next iteration, you go, okay, now we're going to try and measure quality contributions to the graph or something like that. I think we all kind of know that measuring lines of code is a bad idea, right? And measuring sheer volume of commits or volume of contributions can also be not necessarily the right signal.
Yeah.
But I think in this space it can be better than nothing sometimes. But it's a challenge.
It does encourage little itty bitty commits.
It which is good, right? Man, we like little itty bitty commits, I think. Do we?
Very easy
is
to
that a
review on
controversial
tests.
opinion?
It's very easy to review one line.
Yeah.
It is, yeah.
Especially too when it is a lot of community contributions, right? I feel like one's line at a time, it's very approachable as a dev if you're, coming to an unfamiliar system. But also as reviewers, it is a lot easier. And I think it's also hopefully a sign that the system is in a decent place, right? Like if you only need to change one line at a time, then it's mainly doing its job, right? It's just little tweaks and things to, make things easier, enable different features, things like that, as opposed to being like, well, this doesn't do what I need it to do at all. Therefore, I'm going to, go write like a 3,000 line feature and get it to where it needs to be. So.
It is interesting talking about throughput in terms of PRs as being a measurement because, like, obviously it is one of those things that it's almost a meme within engineering communities, right? That it's not a good measurement. But we know, or at least I've heard secondhand, that Atlassian uses it as one of its core metrics for determining performance for engineers is your actual PR count.
I've heard about that recently, so I don't know how I feel about that. But
I don't know how I feel about it either, but it is interesting knowing that because they're a quite large, successful company, and hearing you say something sort of in the same vein that it gives you some starting off point for measuring velocity or capacity within some part of your code base. Like the friction to change, how many PRs, like it's not going to be perfect, but I am curious how you could, what other measurements you could put on top of that to determine in, for example, like Hire a Graph, Candidate Graph, that kind of thing, large shared repos. How can you determine the areas where the code is well architected and well engineered using not just velocity, but velocity and like number of PRs and something else?
I wonder if something as well, like number of PRs and unique contributors would also be a big part of that, right? Because it's like, it's one thing to say like, oh, we've got 10,000 lines in this week, but, like Seamus, the owner of this project is the one that did them all, right? Like that's kind of that versus like we've had 10,000 lines added by like 15 different devs. One definitely speaks to more of like a community, right? And kind of internal open source almost, like building things as a group and building things by consensus versus just like, hey, I'm just going to build this thing and we'll find out if it works for the majority later, right? So I feel like, just having a bunch of PRs coming in, like it's an indicator at least that there's work being done, hopefully, but also having a large number of unique contributors, to me at least, says that like one, it's approachable to a bunch of people, but also two, there's a community. Like there is a bunch of people who are talking about this and working on it, and I guess in theory then using it, you would hope that they're using it if they're making a bunch of commits at least, but...
I know, I agree, and I think the other thing these measures all kind of share is like if you were making a user-facing, like if we were talking about one of SEEK's products, I think the signal to noise here or like the accuracy of these measurements would not be good enough for the sorts of business decisions that are being made. I think one of the things I kind of enjoy about the internal tooling space is, I wouldn't say it's not high stakes. There's a lot of stuff that you can do in this space that really meaningfully impacts developer productivity and efficiency, but it's a little, I think you can use those measures, even though we can all acknowledge that they might be flawed. There's a little, like, you want to be making sure you're trending in roughly the right direction, and I don't think it has to be as completely, totally sure that we're doing exactly the right thing as if it was an externally facing product or something, and I think that means that there's a little bit more latitude. I mean, one of the things I enjoy about the space is that we can talk, that there generally aren't that many product managers or people, or like there's mostly just engineers trying to do a lot of these things, and that applies to doing support and to measuring metrics and to figuring out direction and figuring out what we're going to build and writing documentation and, branding things and marketing things effectively, right? Probably doesn't feel like that all the time, but that's some of what it is. And the fact that we can do that ourselves as engineers is it's enjoyable being multifaceted there. And I think that also means we should be a little less harsh on, raw PRs or raw number of contributors could also be, you could, offer everybody a cookie if they give you a PR and juice that metric. But like at the end of the day, it's, it's not probably not going to happen. It's probably not so bad. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it also feels like because it is, like your customers are in the building, right? It's usually smaller teams. It's usually not going to, cost the company all of their revenue if you do make a product change. So it feels like it's very quick. Like you can decide on a change and in theory get it out the same day. And I feel like that also is a really rewarding system where like, you can see your customers from the beginning of the day to the end of the day, like the impact that your product can make, which I always really liked.
Me too. And I think that even that framing of them being customers of a product is important to a lot of what I think we've done is there needs to be a healthy amount of kind of disconnect. We're sort of saying, yeah, they're in the building, yeah, they're in the Slack instance, we might see them on a Zoom call next week, and like we have to live up to the decisions we've made, both technical and non-technical. At the same time, though, it is useful to recognize that like there's a bit of a difference in their role and your role, and that has all sorts of effects on how much you document and how you support and how you architect things to be easy for people who are effectively not domain experts in your domain, they're domain experts in their own domain. How can you get out of their way and let them get their jobs done?
Yeah, and I mean like they are also forced to be very engaged customers as well, right? Like for a lot of the time it's like you have to use our product and you also have, like a face that you can complain to if it's not working, right? So I feel like that also is really rewarding because it's very rare to have, someone be like, I didn't know that there was this like whole suite of features available in the product. I mean, like it does happen, but it's much rarer, I think, than any of the, I forget what you would call a non-dev customer now. The people who use SEEK, like if you're sitting on those research sessions, a lot of the time it'll be like, wow, there's all this stuff I didn't know existed.
Muggles.
Sorry?
Muggles.
Yes, yes.
I don't know the black magic craft.
Exactly. So like it's really exciting to just have someone who like they have to use it, so they have to have an opinion.
That's interesting though. I mean, you and I have had experiences interviewing people. I don't know if I would agree that they always have an opinion. I think there are definitely there's definitely not even a lot of engineers who are like, oh yeah, these are the tools that we've got. They've got warts, but it is what it is. Like, do you think there's, I think sometimes there's a tendency to conflate some of the internal tooling with some of the like vendor provided tooling, like AWS stuff. Like,
definitely.
Oh, like, yeah, there's something that bugs me about the AWS CLI, but like I got Buckley's chance of getting a change in there. Whereas if there's something that bugs you about one of our internal CLI tools, the contribution's welcome, right?
Yeah.
And if not, complaints welcome.
I think that's where though I find that people do tend to have more of an opinion because they know that it can be changed, right? And they actually do. It's within the realm of possibility that it could be changed to do exactly what they want. And I also do find that like apathy is still an opinion. Like if it's doing well enough that you don't care, that means it's not causing enough friction in your day-to-day life that like you hate it. That is, obviously we want everyone to love our services and our tools, but
that's also probably going to translate to a consumer or a customer that's maybe not very proactive about giving feedback.
yes.
Like, or giving you that, feedback loop that you need to continue to grow the product.
But I think that also that is a sign that it's at least in a healthy state, right? Again, like bare minimum, if it's not causing someone a million problems a day to the point where they don't have to think about it that much, then that's a sign that it's at least doing its job and it's not causing them to not do their job. So
apathy is an opinion. That's
it 100%
your Bridget Barnes
is.
nugget of wisdom for today. I really like that. I think it's a very good point.
Absolutely is.
Yeah, I agree.
It's just made me think of like the argument agnosticism or atheism. It's a religion. It's a belief system. It's a structure of belief.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, you have to take, even not taking a position is taking a position.
Well, yeah, I was going to say potentially bold statement, but even if you're like, don't make it political, it's a political statement.
Agreed. Do you think your perspective has changed now that you're kind of like on the other side of the fence, so to speak? Like for context, Bridget and I used to be in the same team, kind of on this internal tooling space, and now Bridget is not in the same team, which makes me very sad, but
I miss you too.
It's a good situation.
You should come join me. So back on the other side of the fence, and really, you've also made this change recently, and Seamus not as recent, but it's weird because like if I have these problems, I know exactly who to complain to, like not even just like complaining in a channel or to the team. Like I know specifically who to DM and what to DM them to get what I want done. That sounds really manipulative, but like, no,
it sounds effective and
it's effective in getting my problem solved. Yeah.
It's flat hierarchy at work, right?
Exactly. I put in the work to make these people my friends, so now they have to do what I want. I moved out of the tooling team because I specifically wanted to almost do like ethnographic research, right? Like I wanted to go in and I wanted to see what devs do day to day. I wanted to see where their problems are. I decided that I couldn't be an even better tooling dev if I wasn't a better regular dev,
You took dog fooding to the extreme.
Yes.
You're like, I don't just want to consume.
I am the dog.
I don't want to. I don't want to eat the food. I want to become the dog.
Exactly. So for me, like, I feel like I am very conscious when I'm using these tools of like what's working, what's not working. If someone else in the team is saying like, "Hey, how do I do this?" or "I'm having this problem" or something, like I feel like I am making mental notes of like, "Oh, that means that we could do this better and we could do that better." For the most part, I think that our tooling is in a really healthy state. I obviously still see the warts mainly because I see a lot of that as like things that I failed to fix when I was in the team. But it feels like the tools that I worked on at least and that I was involved in, I look back, they are functional.
It's made me think, do the developers or would internal tooling developers, I don't know, what platform developers?
Yeah,
whatever you want to call it.
Platform engineers,
again,
you might call them. Well, it's a bit
I feel like
but
there are two different things there, though, right? Like there's internal tooling and there's services, and services definitely seem more of a platform, whereas tools are usually a way to interface with the platform.
Yeah, it sounds like what we're saying is that developers of internal tools would benefit from being not internal tool developers.
100%, and platform as well.
Almost maybe as a preceding thing, like prerequisite to becoming an internal tool developer. Because I'm thinking about myself, because my second rotation as a grad, so 6 months in, was in iOS, second rotation engineering. So pretty early in my development career, I was doing internal tooling as my primary task. If I hadn't spent any time in iOS, even for those 6 months, my understanding of consuming these internal tools would be vastly different if I was always on that side of the fence looking out.
Yes.
Yeah, I think Bridget and I have found that you need to use the tools first and have a bit of an appreciation for like there has to be something, there has to be a veil. A veil has to exist so that it can be lifted when you go into the internal tooling team. You can't come in and go. I feel like if you get dropped straight into an internal tooling team before having done any engineering work, you kind of go, well, like, what's the point of any of this? Like why it seemed incredibly complicated. What are we trying to achieve here? You have to first go through, oh, this stuff is really easy, right? And then see kind of under the water, the swan is very graceful on top and it's madly kicking away under the water. To have that appreciation, I feel like if you just drop straight into that, it sort of seems like, why are we doing any of this?
Well, I wanted to just share my experience. I think I was one of those people who dropped into a developer team because front-end services was my second rotation. And
I think second rotation even is fine. I think first rotation might be challenging.
But in my first rotation, I did nothing with the graph.
Interesting. Okay.
So it was completely new to me. But one thing that our team did quite regularly was pairing with other teams who are trying to get their stuff into the graph.
Yep.
Given that GraphQL is relatively new, it's not like, TypeScript or anything.
It's not SQL,
Yeah, and especially when you first joined the team too, right? It would have been even newer.
Yeah. So sitting in and watching how other people kind of find their way around our GraphQL repo and putting things through and seeing it work, that was really helpful for me and also helpful for the team to understand what are the pain points in our tool. And actually that was actually quite instrumental in getting, it's helpful for the other team because they get unblocked really quickly, and it's helpful for us because then we know what helps and what doesn't help.
I really like that idea because I think that people often overlook, as an internal tool developer, I think it's easy to overlook that your concerns as a product developer are very different.
Yes.
You don't have the same kind of capacity that a lot of internal tooling teams do. The way that the demands on your time are different. The business, for example, in the space that Reyna and I in, the business has a eye of Sauron beaming down on our team. Like, we work on things that make a lot of revenue for the business, and if engineering decisions or product decisions go poorly, that has significant impact on the business's growth aspects. As an internal tooling developer, it's like you were saying, it's not that it's not high stakes. You can build some of the most impactful things that completely change the engineering landscape, right? It's in often ways more impactful, especially as a developer, because you're impacting your other devs, which in some ways can be some of the best customers to have because you have the most interesting conversations with them. But yeah, I think it would probably go a long way for people to keep in mind that those concerns, that the differences in concerns between internal tooling developers and product developers impacts how much care and apathy they might show towards an internal tool. Like, if it's just doing the job and it's not causing many issues, fine. I've got too many other concerns to be thinking about how to improve another team's tool. But that's the opposite of what you want as an internal tooling team. You want people to be passionate about contributing and giving you feedback. So those two things are in a bit of a juxtaposition, right? Like, what I need to do to add the most value and to prove myself to my domain is grow the product. This tool is to help me grow the product faster without having to think about what the tool is solving.
Yep.
And if I have to think about what it's solving and then also how to improve the tool, that might be in quite significant opposition with the amount of time that the business expects me to put in towards the product focusing things. So it's,
really want the tools and services teams to basically just pair with product devs more, just for exactly like you said, Reyna, like being able to see exactly how customers are using it. I think it's very conscious when you like, oh, I have a GraphQL coming up, right? Whereas a lot of the tools that we use were we're working on were more like integrated into the flow. I didn't even want people to necessarily be like, I am going to do a CI/CD thing, let's pair. Like, I just wanted to try and get devs into the point of, this is what product devs are doing with their day-to-day. You have to care about that because that is exactly what you're working on, And it's not a thing yet, but even from this side of the fence, I do still keep messaging people like, why aren't you doing it? Whereas basically all your user research, where are you building up this knowledge and empathy within your team for all of the product devs, especially because, if you don't have that experience, which I don't think is a prerequisite, especially for grads, just because I think grads can go and pick up things really quickly. Like, you see behind the curtain. I do think that starting in a in a platform or tooling team, sometimes you can get really bad dev practices because you're just like, let's just, YOLO it a bit. But I do think that it's a chance then to learn about what those do and then take that knowledge to a product team, which is really good if you don't want to work on platform. But, there are a lot of people in those teams who haven't done product dev or haven't done product dev in several years. So I think that staying abreast of what people are doing is really, really, really important and something that I would love to see more of.
Agreed. I mean, I think like the more and more I do this sort of stuff, the more and more there are similarities between what happens in a product team, what happens in an internal facing team.
Yes.
Like, product managers are going, or I think sort of researchers are going and doing and sitting with SEEK's customers and understanding how they use our products to bring that back to improve the product. And that feels like the exact same thing between internal teams that are developing internal tools and their customers who are engineers. We should be looking and working with them, and not just, there's a reason why I think researchers go and, there are other signals, but they are going and running user research sessions where they're observing what people do directly, because it's a different form of feedback than just the kind of more observational, or not observational, if passive is the right word, but those metrics we were talking about before, where you're kind of looking at them in aggregate as opposed to, I mean, it's effectively quantitative versus qualitative research, right? Like so going and looking at somebody interacting with something is very different than looking at an aggregated set of data.
Yes. Well, I mean, like looking at what they're doing also just provides all the context for that data, right?
Yep.
Like you can see like, yeah, we've had like 50 PRs today, right? But then like you were saying about like, are PRs, a number of PRs useful? Like you can actually see like, oh, like 50 people raised like individual requests for like really useful things versus like, hey, 3 people made all those PRs and it was because we had bad tests. So every time they merged a PR, it turned out it broke master and then they had to quickly merge another fix or something.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting. Yeah, like high volume of PRs almost might be a sign that there's something wrong. People have to keep reverting and then doing extra PRs. It's like doubling the amount of PRs you have to do. That's really interesting. A comment I was just thinking of about what you were saying about product managers, how it's kind of similar in terms that we have dedicated PMs within the product domain that go out and test with users, candidates, hirers, whatever. Would you say that internal tool devs kind of need to be product managers then? Because you don't usually have a dedicated product manager.
We actually do.
I was going
I don't know
to
if you've
say,
met them. Alex is great.
I feel like yes, but also I definitely wouldn't discount product and UX in that space either. Not if you want to, do the best you can do. Like they are dedicated to that job for a reason.
Yep.
As a dev, you can absolutely do best effort, but like if you're not going and like getting training and like trying to upskill in those areas as well, like you're going to be doing like your best guess at product and UX essentially, right?
Yeah, somebody has to do that work, whether it's an engineer or whether it's somebody with the title of technical product manager or, I don't know, I haven't seen a technical UX designer, but I'm sure they exist. The work has to get done somehow. And so, if people are interested, like I have an interest in that, and I've explored that skill set a little bit. But if people don't have an interest in that, it can't just be done by nobody. It has to exist somewhere. And I think I think that's what's been attractive to me about internal tooling teams is being able to wear all those different hats.
Yeah.
But if that isn't attractive, you need to figure out where that capacity and where those skills and where that work comes from.
So maybe what we could say is internal tool devs need product managers. Maybe in your area there isn't capacity in terms of finances to have a dedicated PM, but identify the people in your team who are passionate about those things or interested in those things because the value of having someone with a product focus. And I think more importantly, PMs do user research. If you're in an internal tooling team and you don't have dedicated PMs and none of your devs are taking on that hat and you're not doing user research, then you're failing your product.
Yeah, I would say internal tooling teams need product management, whether that's done by a product manager or not.
I do think as devs we do need to have that lens at least in some parts of our work.
Yes,
Whether or not you're a product developer or a platform developer or tooling, engineer. To say if you're building a front end page and something just doesn't look right, the navigation would seem really unintuitive for a user, that's something that we should raise and be always thinking about the customer even when you're not directly dealing with them. So not just like a throw of the wall. Someone's going to deal with, I'm just going to build this and then someone's going to think about how it affects the customer. But just kind of having that in the back of our minds when we're doing things.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's an essential quality in as you get more and more senior, you have to understand more of the context of what you're doing. And, the other qualities we kind of talk about are like initiative, right? And that's kind of what you're describing there is being able to say, hey, like I'm not necessarily an expert in this, but I have enough of the context to know that I need to care about it and I'll do what I can. And if not, I'll escalate to other people who have specific expertise.
I actually wanted to bring up a topic. We were talking about understanding how our customers are using the platform or the tool. But then there's also like that education piece of seeing how they're going about it, the way they're using your tool. Is it the way you've built the tool to be used? How have you guys done that in your previous team?
I mean, I think the first approach we took was to try and talk to every team on a regular cadence.
I would say even before then, when we were launching tools, right, we would be like, you're going to be our guinea pig. We're going to come, like you did with the graph, right? We're going to come sit with you. We're going to get you on this tool. We're going to figure this out together. So it was a lot of like pairing and talking to people. And then, we kind of fell off that a bit, which I think is what gave rise to like, let's talk to every team and find out.
We're doing bits and pieces of that now, launching new stuff. But in the kind of steady state, we settled into trying to talk to every team. And I think it was good to have a touch point with teams and to put names to faces regularly. The challenge was it's an enormous amount of effort to get a full team's time, even for an hour, working out scheduling. And I think the conclusion we came to was that it seems like a good idea on paper to have every single person in the team in the room. I'm sure you've all been in meetings where you get 100 people, not 100 people, but you know what I mean, like 10, 15 people in a room. It doesn't necessarily mean you get more information out of them. And so I think where I've gone since doing that is more just one-on-one interviewing. And that is a huge skill to itself and huge amount of respect to the researchers that do that day in, day out, because there is a lot of nuance and a lot of art to it. And it can be the first few iterations of me running a particular interview to dig in on some subject are always pretty rough. You don't really get the answers you want out of them. You have to tweak the questions and alter the phrasing and clarify and put in to really dig in on what you're doing. And there's also an aspect to it of which you need to go in with an open mind and expect to end up on tangents a little bit or end up on having other discussions and treat it not as like, I'm going to do 4 interviews and get all the information I need, but I'm going to keep doing this over a long time and get hopefully some of the information I need and probably a grab bag of other stuff that I didn't even think of and a bit more of like discovery. And I mean, this all kind of comes out of there's a book called, what's it called? Continuous Discovery Habits, something like that. And that's been kind of pretty interesting digging into and learning about that space, and I think has helped a little bit.
Yeah, I also think that it's really important to use a variety of methods as well, right? Like even when we were doing the interviews, it was very much like we're exploring one avenue. This isn't giving us like everything, right? You're never ever going to get everything, but I do feel like the more varied approaches you get, the more different information you're going to get to build up a more complete picture.
So did you find those like the training class approach ineffective, or?
Training classes were fantastic for building new tools, because that's the thing, right? There's also like different aspects of this where it's a new tool or a new platform versus an existing one, right? So Reyna, I'm sure like, as you were building up the graph more, right, it was really great for figuring out how things work to like pair with people. Did you find that was less effective as you went on?
Yeah, I think it was always more about teaching people how graph works. That was a hard concept to get through, and it was always figuring out whether we use their concrete example to, get their work through at the same time as training or educating them how the graph works, or doing a separate training class or a training session where they go through an arbitrary example.
That's really interesting, because it sort of sounds like what we're talking about is there are some internal tools where getting the teams up to speed is more about just explaining or instructing them on the integration patterns, whereas what you're like, that might be something more like Gantry or some other like server infra tools, right, where it's more about just understanding the contract that you need to adhere to like stand up this infrastructure and what it is that it's doing, but not actually understanding the internal mechanisms of how it's working. Whereas with Graph, it's very much about understanding the internal mechanics of the technology that you're using.
I think you explained that really well. Yeah, that's probably where I'm getting a bit tangent.
I think there's always a tension between, some of these tools we develop are meant to abstract away some of the details, right? But there's always going to be value in understanding the underlying details, as there is in everything in technology. And so how much of that do you present? How much of that do you abstract away? And when is the right time to do that? And when is the right time to, and this kind of comes a little bit back to kind of that, some ideas and the theory of how to write documentation about, pieces of documentation like a like a tutorial or kind of a getting started guide being about kind of teaching you some of the basics and being repeatable and being more about learning as opposed to like a how-to guide, which is more about achieving a concrete task and not blending those too much. And I think that kind of the kind of instructor-led learning session where you're teaching somebody how to use a tool can blend both, but provides more opportunity for the real-time, like, hey, why did this happen and why didn't this do what I expected it to do? And you dig a little bit into what's going on behind the scenes. That can be very valuable. It's high effort.
Yes. How did your teams approach documentation?
I don't know whether we did.
Yeah, I'm trying to think back to engineering. I'm like, what doc stuff did we have? We had a lot of automated things. Like we had the .me index. I can never remember what the hell it's called.
Codex.
We had codex and stuff like that. I don't even really remember how.
So, like, would you write things like READMEs with the intention that developers would read those? Did you work on, like, additional, this is the documentation folder or anything?
I remembered. We had the old SSOD doc stuff. It was good because we essentially we had 100 different repos in the engineering team, but, maybe a dozen of them needed actual docs for people to interact with. So we didn't need every single thing to have some automated generated doc all the time. But the ones where we needed it to, we're essentially just using make docs to hook it up to a collection of these shared docs. So you just go to the engineering doc point and then all of our different tooling things are in there. But I found them not consistent, not accurate. The README I usually tend to try and keep, I as a practice tend to try and keep the README focused on people that are contributing to the code base.
Yep.
And link out to some consumer documentation. It's usually how I try to do it.
Yeah.
So the README is just about like how to load the code, how to test the code, that kind of stuff, how to deploy it.
Yeah.
We've done, front-end services has also done something quite similar. So getting started, running it locally in your thing, but then also other features you might want to use could also be in the GitHub README, but then linking out to Confluence for certain patterns that you might want to incorporate in your work.
I mean, I think very much in the vein of we were discussing earlier, product management and the need for kind of like research in product and consumer-facing teams. And I think that's also a useful mental model for me often is like, what do we need in a platform or an internal tooling team? And like, there are people whose jobs it is at SEEK to keep knowledge bases up to date and update documentation, and there's no reason why you shouldn't. You don't need the same capability to some extent within an internal tooling team. It's just a question of who does it and how much effort do you put into it. But it is one of those things that needs to be done and needs to be maintained to have there's a reason why documentation exists. I think the particularly in an increasingly remote world, right? The online synchronous training session with the experts in the tool is great, but is not practical, right?
It's also not super scalable either.
Not scalable either,
So, yeah.
Yeah,
How do
we
you
found
scale?
that really hard.
Yeah, I think it's a good thing to talk about while we're talking about dev tools, right? Like, how do you scale support for these things? Like we talked a little bit about like early days, you've got no consumers, you're trying to get people to pick it up. You can have guinea-pig teams where you maybe spend a little bit more time than you would on future teams just to help iron out. You're essentially dog fooding with your first consumer. We talked about running like dedicated classes, parachuting into teams, maybe not on adoption, but mid-life cycle of a tool to try and like understand what patterns are evolving, that kind of stuff. But how do you scale the support when your tool becomes every single API uses this thing? How do you scale that support with a team of less than 10 engineers?
I mean, not to point at the sign too much, but like, don't make me tap the documentation sign again. Like,
Yeah.
I don't think there is any other way, right? Like the challenge is that writing high quality documentation is hard, but it's the only thing that scales adequately. I think I could imagine I'm waiting for the company that starts doing kind of like ChatGPT documentation stuff or because I think that's more of an interface problem than it is a
getting to the information.
Yeah.
Is often half the problem with docs, right?
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Right. And so you have to think a lot about what you name things and how to navigate the documentation and how to structure it such that people can find what they're looking for easily. And I think there's a lot of value in having an interface that's kind of like chat-y, particularly in Slack, right? Because the way that support doesn't scale is when you end up with too many support queries, right?
Yep.
And when those support queries are the same or they're variations of the same thing, it doesn't matter how many times you put in the Slack channel topic and the channel description, please search first, please look up to sometimes the very previous post that somebody's made is the exact same question. Doesn't matter, you will still get those questions. And so that stuff is sometimes hard to scale when it's those really like the stuff that you could search for very easily. But I think putting the interface to answering those questions inside of like the tool where you're asking them could be a bit of a game changer.
Yes.
And particularly for, I think like where I've seen that kind of support scale quite well is when you have really good documentation, you need to be looking at the support queries that are coming in and making sure that the documentation actually could, even if they didn't search in the documentation for it, I think a good practice, a good habit to get into is every support query that comes in, try and figure out, search your own documentation to see if you could have answered that question by looking at it. And if the answer is no, well, there's some new documentation to write. But in really healthy situations where I've seen where you get to is you still, depending on the size of the organization, you still might get kind of those esoteric or like very nuanced queries that you have to handle. And at some scale, you still get a lot of them to the point where you need dedicated support. And I could see like some sort of chat interface that can go and look through previous queries and learn from what you've written and ingest your documentation and then try and answer some of those or give you a guess as to answering some of those could be pretty useful. But it comes back to documentation.
Yeah, and I feel like there's like so much opportunity to make that MVP as well, right? Like, you know, even if you start with a brand new tool, right, you go and work with a couple of teams to see what works and what doesn't. You take the questions that all three teams ask you, right? That's your first FAQ, that's your first documentation. Yep. And then just like as more and more support questions come in, you know, every time something is asked for the second time, like it feels like that could just, bam, we go put it in documentation, right? And I don't know, to me that always has felt like the best way to scale up as well, because then you're always basically getting things kind of just in time. You don't have to put in a huge amount of effort up front when it's maybe not as useful because, you know, things are still in flux, you're still figuring them out. But as you get more and more established and more people are using it, you're kind of offloading more and more of those questions to the documentation as they're relevant. And then it's, not such a big investment.
I think you both nailed that on the head because I think it's one of the things that we see as we scale is you just can't service those requests. And you can't just put more people on a problem. Like these two things we know are true, right? Like you can only stretch a person so thin and you can't just put more people on a team because it introduces other kinds of overhead. There's definitely a plateau to the size of your team when it comes to support. Mm-hmm. Just ask anyone who runs a call center.
I'd like to add to that as well. So I think another thing to help with scaling out support is having like a champion for your tool in other people's teams so that when new people come along, they know they have someone on their team who is familiar with your tool or your platform and able to share that knowledge. Or it's kind of like part of culture building, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Sharing that with the newcomer.
No, that's a really good point. And I think that is also the nirvana of owning an internal tool, which is when you have a Slack channel dedicated to your tool, which I think is often useful when you know, we could have a whole podcast on how to structure Slack channels properly, but like my view is, you know, as a team that owns internal tooling, you have a team channel, and then when you have tools that become big enough to warrant their own support, it's often useful to break them out into a dedicated support channel. And the reason I like that is because if you do have those experts outside of your team that become champions in that tool, then they start answering the support questions for you. And it's like, and often because they're using that tool day to day, they may actually have better insight into those problems than you do as somebody in an internal tooling team who has not, you know, written a feature for a customer facing service in quite some time. So that is also a real good way to scale things, and make sure you have stickers to give those people when they do that, because that it just drives the flywheel, the internal tooling flywheel a little bit harder.
Yeah,
Well-
it's interesting. I think there's a lot of synergy in what the different approaches that we're talking about here, because Bridget said something that I really like, which was that your doc should be part of your MVP. And I think that's really true, because a lot of the time, if you don't have a container to put the thing in, then no one will put it anywhere. They just won't create the resource. So like in this case, docs, right? If you don't have a container to put your docs in already, then when someone finds something that's a frequently asked question, they don't have anywhere to put it. And they're not going to go out of their, usually not going to go out of their way to create that container for that information to be held in. So like I think that's a really good idea, making the docs part of your MVP. And then Nik, you were talking about having essentially like an evangelist, an advocate within other teams, maybe not necessarily an ex-member of the team, but just someone that you've sort of has a strong relationship with the team, has shown interest in it. You're essentially investing in their passion and then leveraging the subconscious behaviors of them wanting to help their own teammates through the use of this tool. Rather than going to you, they can just short circuit and go to the person who knows, the localized expert, I guess you'd call them.
Totally. I don't want to rely, I don't want to I don't want to outsource that too much to them. But what I tend to find is when the product is doing its job well enough, those people emerge naturally, and they understand their own sort of expertise, and that they can add a lot of value to the conversation by providing their perspective and their help voluntarily, not as a kind of, an extra thing they need to do.
And I think it has a really positive feedback loop that person usually will help update your docs.
Yeah.
Because their own team can't find something, or their team asks a question, they'll go to the doc, they'll try to find, I can't find an answer for that. And then maybe they know the answer, or they reach out to, earlier on, Bridget, you were saying, people within these teams because you used to work with those teams, you go straight to them and ask them questions because you're friends basically at that point.
Yeah.
So that person's short-circuiting, getting the fast answer, and they can update the docs. And I have seen that behavior happen quite a lot.
Plus, I feel like, if you have a community around it, right, as you do get more devs, you would hope that the community would also scale with it as well, right? So then if your community is helping out with features and documentation and support, then that's also a really great way to scale, because it's just kind of natural momentum of it. Plus, that's where all the rewarding stuff comes from, right? Like getting to see everyone getting really engaged.
Yeah, definitely. I think for me personally, biggest part of the reward is actually seeing people consuming the thing and enjoying the thing that you built. I think that's why I feel like, it might not be true, but I feel like a lot of engineers lean towards product or front end, UI focused stuff, because it's the most visible thing that you can engineer, right? You can actually see someone clicking the button, you can look at the metrics and know that 1,000 people today clicked on that button that I made. I remember saying that as a grad, being so stoked that I could see 1,000 people clicking on my button. So I think probably one thing that we would be remiss to forget talking about would be sunsetting tools. Because obviously we've talked about adoption and support, but what about, killing something off or letting it sleep with the fishes? I was trying to think of some other calm,
Goes to the
peaceful
farm up
Sleep
state.
with the fishes.
Yeah, exactly. It goes to the farm up state.
Yeah, it's a challenge. Can we link? I wrote a blog post about this a little while ago. Can we link that? Do we have show notes? I think I've
We
asked that
should,
before.
yeah, we should. Down
Read
in the
out the
We
description.
can,
URL.
if possible,
The
Glenn.
Medium article, something. Medium article.
It's a Medium article. It's tough, right? People, this is to some extent, you can be a victim of your own success. If people love the thing that you've built so much that they don't want to see it go, but there inevitably comes a time where you go, this thing doesn't really serve its purpose, or it really the part of the equation you need to be looking at is the value that it's bringing to the people that are using it enough for the amount of effort that goes into maintaining it, right? I think a good example would be at SEEK we used to have a tool called SQS Move, which I don't know if you folks have used, and I think is in the process of being sunsetted. But
Yes, it is.
the SQS Move is what it sounds like. Its job is to take messages from one SQS queue and move them to another SQS queue, right? And the canonical use case for this is when you have a SQS dead letter queue and you want to redrive those messages. You take them out of the redrive queue and you put them in the main queue, and then they hopefully flow through without error. And so, we had a tool because it was a common use case. And at some point we said, hang on a sec, this doesn't seem to be giving people a whole lot of value, right? Like this is a couple of CLI commands or it's a couple of lines of code. Like,
also, sorry, the introduction of the redrive feature in AWS was the main death knell for this tool.
Yes, that as well, right? And so this is now a native feature in the. So I think it was a native feature in the AWS in the console, and I think as of a little while ago, it's actually now something in the API as well, right? But so that was the big sticking point for a little while. We had this tool that could do this thing that wasn't easily possible with one click in the console that, people who are on support needed to do, right? There's some dead letters, you got to replay them. Then it came to the console, but there was still teams who were relying on it from because this SQS move tool was, runnable from CI, right? They were kind of doing this programmatically. And now we have something that totally replaces it, I think, as an API to do the redrive. And so we had to start the process of sunsetting it. But it is challenging to say, hey, this thing that you're using and you've built all this tooling around and on top of is going to go away. And where do you go from there?
Yeah, I also personally really hated the thing where we would get to it, hey, you're the last team using this thing. Our job is kind of to do the things that enable multiple teams. So like this is suddenly like very against like what we're here to do essentially, So you can take it, but we can't in good faith support this anymore. That always felt terrible to me because I was like, I know you're busy. I know you have better things to do than take on this tool that like, you don't know how it works. You just use it, right? And we're kind of saying like either get off of it or you're taking it over.
And I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but the reason that felt so terrible was it kind of feels like what you're saying is, well, my time is more important than your time, right? Like I'm maintaining this tool and we don't want to spend the time maintaining it anymore. So now you have to maintain it. And that feels like it's kind of making this weird value judgment when the reality is not quite. It's not that my time is more important than your time that I'm going to give you this tool. It's that like, it's about what you could do with that time, like if you got it back. It's saying like my time could be used helping your team and a bunch of other teams as opposed to this scenario where it's kind of just helping your team.
I think also just because it like really, the thing that I really loved was helping people, right? So it felt like it was flying in the face of like, I'm doing this to try and help more people overall, but very trolley problem-esque, right? Like I'm going to run this train over you. To try and save these other people.
Yeah, it is to some extent. And I mean, it's and I think the reason it's like, it's not quite the trolley problem, at least from the point of view of the, tooling team's perspective, is that it's, do I run over one team with a trolley or do I run over 20 teams with a trolley? Because what I could do if I had this time back is I could build something for the 20 teams.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
And that's the thing. It was like, this totally makes sense. But now I have to look you in the eye and say, Reyna, you have to do extra work now.
Yes, and that is the hard part. And I think the hard part often of sunsetting this tooling is you just have to commit to doing it.
Yes.
You have to weigh things up and make a decision and get the buy-in from the right amount of people, right? And at the right levels, right? If you're going to inconvenience one team, it's a little bit easier. If you're going to inconvenience 20 teams, it might still be worth doing depending on the scenario, but you might have to get a bit more buy-in from leadership at that point. But you do have to commit.
Yeah. I think also being very clear in exactly what the ask is, right? Like, not just say like, hey, we're going to sunset this tool. Say like, we are going to sunset this tool. That means you get off it or you take it, right? Or like by this date, or like, we're going to sunset this tool. That means you have to make this config change here, and blah, blah, blah. Like, I think being very specific also really helps because then it's very clear to teams, like exactly what you want from them.
It's interesting, right? Because you kind of need to set a deadline, but you can't actually just turn a service off.
Absolutely.
Well, this is the big first hurdle, and people kind of go, okay, well, we don't think this is bringing much value anymore. We think we should switch it off. When should we switch it off? If I say I'm turning this thing off on, the 1st of January, and when it comes to the 1st of January, a critical like load-bearing production service is still using this thing, I don't think it's a surprise to anybody that like we're not going to be turning this thing off. But you still have to set the date for the 1st of January. Because if you don't, nobody will migrate off of it, right? And it's just, you're in a product team, you got a lot of things to do, a lot of people, relying on you to generate, ultimately more business for SEEK. You've got other priorities. This is not going to happen, right? So you still have to do it, even though we know we're not going to switch it off.
It's a somewhat political move, kind of, right? Like,
yes.
Everyone knows you're not going to turn it off. Like, if a team just doesn't move off, you're not going to turn it off. And that's where I think the handing it over to the last consumer might feel bad, but it seems like the best balance between saying you're going to turn it off, not actually being able to turn it off because there's technical implications for that, but essentially meaning we're going to turn off support.
Yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm. If you're still on this thing, we're not actively building new features or working on bugs. If you find issues, you need to fix those issues, which kind of means if there's only one team using the thing, we might as well own the repo.
And that's also a bluff. When you say that the thing's going to be switched off and there's still production load on it, it's not going to be switched off. When you say we're not going to give you support, guess what? If somebody gets woken up at 4 a.m. and it's a service that you used to own and you're trying to hand it off to them and they don't really know about it, you should expect to get that phone call at 4 a.m. because you are still, at the end of the day, the expert in the service. You might have said we're not providing support anymore, but can we swear on this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
When the shit hits the fan, you're going to get the call, right? And that just is what it is. And that's part of, being an engineer and we're all working towards a bigger goal. Part of being a team, right? But yeah, there's a lot of bluffing involved, a lot of politics involved, a lot of just communication and that's really the hard part, right? The actual technical aspects of turning things off.
You can just delete it.
You can just delete it,
it's
right?
gone. Yeah.
And you can just, most of the time, you can figure out who's using it. If you do a little bit of kind of digging through places and, maybe looking at some access logs and stuff or just talking to people, that's the easy. The hard part is navigating all the rest of the bits and who's going to do this work and what does this mean for the other teams and what priorities do they have. It's more political than it is technical, I think.
Yeah. In that kind of vein, Reyna, I'm wondering as working on a service that people are interacting with, making changes to, right? I'm guessing that if, your team wanted to make a big change, right? You've suddenly got a lot of moving parts and a lot of different teams where people have to kind of line up. I'm guessing if you wanted to do a code change, that's pretty major. You can't just do that and expect everyone to be kind of on board, or even when you're not sunsetting, having a thing where, you potentially have to coordinate some of the work as well, right? For all right, you're going in first, we're going to do this, which means these PRs need to go in at some point as well. How did you kind of manage that?
In small PRs, smaller chunks, saying this is going out. The most immediate example I can think of is upgrading Apollo to the latest version, and that took out a lot of changes, and it was just doing that incrementally. Yeah, it was, to be honest, I think what we did was just telling the teams who had PRs open and also announcing it on a public Slack channel saying, this is coming, just hold off on your changes or be aware, and always just be pulling in from this branch while we get this rolled out, and trying to over-communicate on that front. So that people are always staying updated and ready. Yeah. Trying to minimize that within a couple of weeks. But yeah.
Do those changes get political as well?
Not that no, it hasn't happened. Well, the political change was more turning off an API because we did not know who was using it. It was a public API.
Right, tell us more about that.
Yeah. It was, it's our, can I say this on the podcast? It's our job search API. The API that search jobs, it's public. And
the new one, the TypeScript one?
The old one and the new one, because the new one had to be backwards compatible.
Yep, yeah, there you go.
Because we have public consumers and we don't know who they are. So that was pretty hard to know what to do. Mm-hmm. But is that a tangent to what we're talking about here?
No, I think that's interesting if you want to go down there, yeah.
Yeah. I think we kept on announcing in production FYI saying, we are turning this off. If you're not going to turn it off, if you're not going to change to our new API, you're going to get affected. And that was after trolling through all the GitHub repos to see which internal team is hitting us. And even that led to some surprises. And then finally we turned it off and we saw who screamed, and most of the time no one did, which was kind of good. The whatsmysalary.com didn't work for a whole day. It's kind of
really?
funny. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess the Slack messages didn't make it to them.
I think they figured out our new API.
I'm sure they did. Yeah.
So they came back on after a while. Yeah.
That's it's very bad engineering, but I am so tempted constantly by chaos engineering of like, well, if we turn it off, if it's not working for someone, they'll come complaining.
It's not bad engineering. I think that's the right way to do it. I think like you
have to be a bit more calculated in the risk, I think, than I tend to be of just like, oh, let's turn it off, see what happens.
Sure, no, but I think like what Reyna was talking about is like communicating widely.
Absolutely,
and like
absolutely.
There does come a point where you have to say, we're going to switch it off and see who screams, particularly with a public API that doesn't require any sign up or anything to use.
This was definitely more in the terms of like, well, I could do a couple of days of analysis, or I could just turn it off right now and we'll know within a day, basically, right? But
yeah, that would be really bad. That would be a P1 really for us.
Yeah, exactly.
It depends what it is. I know, I can't remember who, but some large organization's written stuff about how they do their kind of sunsetting, and I think they add a header, and that's the way that GitHub kind of do it or have done it. I think in the past is you do a brownout for an hour or two, and maybe you inject some latency, and that might show up in people's radars if they're not paying attention.
I really like that, injecting latency. Like the service is not non-functional. It'll still work. Customers will feel it. They'll feel that it's a bit slow to get through the experience that's normally snappy and very responsive.
Yep.
Someone's going to complain, usually.
Yep.
I feel like I hadn't thought of that in like manufacturing, not a complete non-function of the system.
It's just friction, right?
Degradation. Yeah. Degrade the system so that it frustrates people, but it works. See who comes
exactly
ringing bells.
And the same thing with doing a brownout for an hour or two, widely communicate it so that when somebody does have a problem, they hopefully can, fairly quickly get back to what the root cause is and then bring it back and they'll
feel silly for not reading Slack enough.
This is the goal, right? It's just that,
we did say something 6 months ago and then every month since then.
Exactly. Yeah. To make it incontrovertible that you probably should have found out, and it was a different sort of systems failure that meant that you didn't figure out that this was going to happen.
Yeah, I remember in Apply we had we didn't have a dedicated support channel. At first it was just like the channel that the team used that people dropped in and asked questions and stuff. I know that was like that for a lot of us across Slack, and eventually the pattern of like your internal communications channel and your external one started to grow a bit more. We had @ handles for all of our consumers, anyone who wanted to get on our API. Obviously, we had to issue a whitelist for them. So we had a decent way of tracking everyone that was using it. But sometimes that team might have multiple services using the same issue or whitelist, that kind of stuff. Obviously, public is a very different scenario. When you've got an internal tool and every new consumer has to come to you to even use it in the first place, you just keep track of that and just make sure that you're recording that somewhere, either in a Slack group that people get added to, something like that. And then when you want to sunset something, we would just @ them, this change is happening.
Yep.
And we made sure that the staff engineer or lead engineer from every team was the person in that handle. And we just updated it regularly every 6 months or so. We made sure. Cool. All right. Well, we talked about some really good things today. I really liked the stuff at the end about injecting latency. I think that's a really...
You can do that today with Automat if you want.
You can just do that with your services.
Anytime we're talking about chaos engineering, I get excited. I think that idea, when Netflix did the whole Chaos Monkey thing and just like, let's just throw caution to the wind and just make things fail and see what happens, like it does solve some of the biggest headaches as internal tooling developers. Yeah, I said it right the first time. Because like we've sort of said across all these things, some of the hardest things is knowing how to target your support, how to scale support, who to talk to, when to talk to them. These things kind of go away when you just turn the light off and see who complains that it's dark, basically. Mm-hmm. I think it's been some really good information. The idea of parachuting into teams and sort of one-on-oneing with one expert in the team, I think is something that I don't see enough of. And I find personally that when I'm trying to adopt a new tool, that's been the most effective way for me.
Mm-hmm.
Nice. Thanks for listening to the episode today. I hope you found it as informative as I did. I've been your host, Seamus, with Bridget,
Goodbye.
Nik,
Bye.
and Reyna.
Bye.
Cheers.